Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And today we are talking about the painter Marcel Duchamp. Is that right? Did I say Duchamp? Is that right?
Yeah, that you say it, Marcel Duchamp, and I would call him a fine artist. He worked in different
Fine
media.
artist. All right, excellent. Well, before we get into that, as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment. We want to know what you're thinking. Are we doing a good job? Are we sucking? How do you feel about us? So let us know. Hey, Randall, what's a decent way to reach out to us?
Well, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com, and also you can go to our Facebook page, Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall.
Excellent. Okay, so today's episode is about art, and it is a visual medium. So if you are going to see this on YouTube or Facebook, at the bottom, we will have examples of the artwork that we're referencing. If for some reason you don't have that accent, we'll give you the title of the work, and you can Google the work. Randall and I will try to use our descriptive powers so that you get a sense of what we're looking at, even if we're not actually going to be able to show it to you for copyright reasons. So let's just begin. And again, I'm really good butcher, but Randall, who was Marcel Duchamp?
All right, yeah. So we're talking about Marcel Duchamp today. He was a fine artist who was born in 1887 in France. He was born in a small town in France, and he went off to college and is fairly bourgeois. He's always been one of my favorite fine artists, if not my favorite fine artist, because there's a heavy conceptual component to all of his work. I mean, I don't have a problem with fine artists who just care about aesthetics, making pretty pictures or whatever. But I really like work that has that strong conceptual component. He was very interested in exploring ideas behind the artwork. So he's born in 1887, like almost exactly the same time when Kodak's first camera came on the market, which is 1888. Kodak's camera was the first camera that, previous to the Kodak, photographers had to carry around like a dark room practically to take their pictures. And when the Kodak system came out, they just press the button and then later on get their film developed.
Wow.
And then color photography came out in 1907. And so the reason I mention this is because, for like hundreds of years in Europe, there was a very shall we say, cultivated system of oil painting where oil painters would depict the lives of wealthy patrons, their belongings. I mean, it was like oil painters were for hundreds of years in Europe were like the Instagram of of Europe, and
Yeah.
and so if you look at a lot of these old paintings, that's what you see. You just see the rich people posing like in front of their dogs with their dogs, in their mansions, and it's totally like old Instagram. They liked historical scenes too, to decorate their mansions, religious scenes. I mean, if you go to a museum, you'll see this stuff. You'll see like Colosseum paintings of like gladiators in the Colosseum, or
Everything looks like it's drawn from nature.
yeah. So they liked things that were photorealistic, right? They wanted I mean, this is pre-photography, so they wanted paintings that looked like a photograph, basically. I mean, it was
Like Vermeer, for example.
yes. So they prize realism, and European oil painters they had achieved a great deal of skill in this area. Now in the 1860s, photography, even though the Kodak came out in 1888, there was like a whole a history of photography that predated that. Photographs were being made and circulated and changing the way everybody thought about art, about painting. So in the 1860s, you had a group of painters in France, and I'm going to say these names. You've heard probably most of them. It's Monet, Renoir, Sisley, and Bazille, and they started an art movement that we know today as Impressionism. And the idea behind Impressionism is they weren't trying to paint what you realistically saw with your eyes. You know, they weren't trying to just be mere photographers, so to speak, even though this is pre-photography. Or it's like, you know, even though photography was just invented. So they wanted to capture something, you know, because there was a crisis, because painters at the time, you know, they had a crisis of identity, you know, like if there's a camera, and cameras are obviously getting better and getting easier to use, what are we going to do? What is our role? And so Impressionism is like the answer to that. And, you know, it's interesting to read about because, you know, it seems obvious to us today, and the Impressionists are probably considered today some of the greatest painters, you know, to modern audiences. But back then, I mean, people were like, it was a hard road for them to hoe. You know, back then people didn't know what to think about these people, and they weren't very accepted. But the Impressionists, they tried all sorts of things. You know, they painted outdoors. They tried to use natural light. There were these new paints that were synthetic that would dry quickly. You know, like Bob Ross on PBS. You know, he does like the happy little trees. I mean, he can only do that kind of thing because he wasn't using oil paints. You know, he's using these new fast synthetic paints, you know, that were just coming out back then. And so there was a lot. And you know, if you look at some of the paintings of that era, you know, I mean, like I said before, it's like you have all these like very famous painters that everybody knows about. Like I'll say some of these names. Some of these people that are famous Impressionists. So you got Mary Cassatt, Cezanne, Degas, Monet, Renoir, I already said. Oh, and sometimes people consider the sculptor Rodin, Auguste Rodin. Sometimes people say Rodin. Some people consider him an impressionist. I don't know if you've ever seen like a Rodin exhibit. Have you seen a Rodin exhibit, Chris?
I've actually been to the Rodin Museum in France.
I have too. Where is it at?
It's gorgeous. Yeah, he's one of my favorite sculptors.
Where is it at?
It's in France.
It's in. Oh, okay. I've been to one not in France.
There is. I cannot remember if it was in the south of France or in Paris, but I've seen the Gates of Hell. There is even here in Los Angeles. I've seen his work. He gets around, Rodin. Auguste is in most major fine art museums in the world, thankfully.
Yeah, he's very famous. You know, you look at his work. He's not trying to achieve like a realistic-looking figure. He's not trying to make forms that are realistic. He's trying to make forms that are he's trying to capture something internal, right? Something inside of the artist's state of mind, and he's trying to communicate it to you. You know, and later on, some people who are considered post-impressionists, you're talking about like Van Gogh, Gauguin, Seurat, Toulouse-Lautrec. Okay, so
that is where you're saying. I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, so what I'm saying is that photography really it created this explosion of experimentation in the arts, and Duchamp was lucky enough to have been born right at that moment.
So it's an interesting thing. So 1907, you're saying Kodak comes out with the
1888.
Right, but 1907
was the first real commercial color photography where you could
right. So it's interesting to say this because Duchamp would have been 20, correct?
Let's see. In 1907?
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have been 20.
So, you know, when I was 20, that's actually, I'm dating myself, I was 20 in 1985. But in 1985, two things really happened that I remember that are world-changing today. But just to give it some context, personal computers. When I started college, we used a VAX system, a network. And then I remember, like, around 85, the first kid in my dorm brought in his own computer. And then soon after, the whole school would have their own computer. And instead of having to use, like, DOS prompts to type, I could just write like a normal human being. And also around that same time, I remember that's when CDs started coming out. And that also was, like, an amazing, mind-changing thing for a number of reasons. And it's interesting to think that, you know, so you would have been 20, in 95? So in 95, I guess.
That's right.
So what was the big technological thing in 95? It wouldn't be the internet just yet. Would it have been in 95?
Let's see. Well, it's funny because like the web had just really started very recently around that moment.
So
So
then I
yeah,
guess
I mean,
it would have been like the web, would have been like the internet. It would have been probably what MP3s were starting around then, or at least
yeah,
some variant.
MP3s, Napster, yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think that there's something interesting about when you're 20 and everything that was establishment starts to fall apart, and there's all these new ways of doing things. I honestly always feel like the 20-year-old is always going to be the one to most embrace the end of the old and the beginning of the new. And I feel like, as you said, he was just so well situated. And one of the first things that I guess he jumps into that is very, very the opposite of realism, and very much even in sense, I think even more dynamic and bohemian and more avant-garde than Impressionism is Cubism. So can you explain Cubism and
Well,
Duchamp's involvement in Cubism?
yeah, sure. So Cubism, this period is really interesting because, yeah, like you just expressed, that era in the late '90s, there's just a lot of technologies coming out, and these technologies are changing art. And and it's funny because when you read about this era, there's a lot of pushback, from the older people. It's really very interesting. And today, all those older artists, the establishment artists, no one would ever remember them. Like I've been to museums and looked at the most famous works from that era,
Yeah.
the most lauded works from that era, and I'm
Yeah.
telling you, they're completely forgettable. You would never.
So Duchamp's like one of those millennials going, "Okay, boomer."
Yeah, exactly. He's exactly like that. So so Cubism is like an offshoot of these. There's a lot of art movements at the time. So Cubism is one of these movements, and Cubism, like a lot of aesthetic movements, even like movements outside of the aesthetics. Like I don't know if you know this, but well, a lot of movements get named by their critics. Like critics give a movement, an art aesthetic, a movement, an art movement, a name that's like supposed to be derogatory, and it ends up being like the name of the movement. So that's what happened with Cubism. So there was an art critic who saw like the Cubists were like a bunch of impressionists who were trying to capture on a canvas multiple perspectives of something at once. And so they would disassemble the object, and it would look like the object would be made up of all these little geometric shapes. So like late Picasso was kind of like that, but some of the more earlier impressionists, they were even more extreme.
Wow.
There was it almost looked like a checkerboard. And so the Cubists, they got this derogatory name from a critic, and they just accepted it. And I want to say what's interesting, in physics, Chris. Oh God, what is it? Quantum physics.
Yes,
Quantum physics. You've heard of quantum physics, right?
I have indeed.
So quantum.
I guess where you're at different places at the same time.
Well, quantum physics, yes, something like that. So quantum physics was a derogatory name given to a theory in physics by a critic, that thought that what was being suggested, the theory being suggested, was ridiculous. So he called it quantum physics, and it just stuck.
Yeah.
So it happens everywhere, So the Cubists, they were trying to represent the subject from multiple perspectives at once on a single canvas. And so they would, and there was kind of, and as time went on, there was kind of like a discussion with the Cubists of whether or not they even needed to represent a subject. And they went full abstraction, some of them. But in 1911, Duchamp, along with his two older brothers, he had two older brothers who are also fine artists, by the way, and they started holding a regular discussion group with other Cubist artists in their home, and they called it the Puteaux group because that's the area they lived in. So you can see, like, even early on, Duchamp, his brothers, Duchamp especially, he's interested in these ideas. He's interested in laying like a theoretical groundwork for the art he's going to make. A lot of times Pablo Picasso is called the inventor of Cubism. Let's see. So Duchamp is like an obscure artist, and he's working with the other Cubists. And in 1912, he comes up with a painting called Nude Descending a Staircase Number 2.
Oh, now this is a fascinating piece because this was, okay, so he may have came up with it in 1912, but this was his great American premiere. This, there's a famous, in the history of art, one of the most important 20th century events is the New York Armory, the 1913 New York Armory exhibition.
Yeah, well, before we get to that, let me just say that he and the other Cubists, he and his other buddies, his brothers, they were with the Buteau group. They were doing shows, in their area. And so he painted the Nude Descending Staircase Number 2 for the show. Now, let me give you this quote from Duchamp, how he described the painting, okay?
Okay, so, and then let's describe the painting, too, for people who can't see it.
Well, this will give you, his quote will give you a lot of idea of what it looks like. Okay, this is from Duchamp. The idea of describing the movement of a nude coming downstairs while still retaining the static visual means to do this particularly interested me. The fact that I had seen Corona photographs of fencers in action and horse galloping, what we today call stroboscopic photography, gave me the idea for the nude. It doesn't mean that I copied these photographs. The futurists were also interested in somewhat the same idea, though I was never a futurist. And of course, the motion picture with the cinematic techniques was developing then too. The whole idea of movement of speed was in the air. So I just want to say that he's referring to the chronophotographs he's referring to are probably the ones of Éadweard Muybridge, which is Muybridge was like a huge influence on like a lot of artists at the time. Muybridge was able to capture sort of high-speed photographs of horses galloping, of people walking, and it fascinated people because no one had ever seen anything like that before. He captured these photographs using multiple cameras and flash bulbs. So, Chris, how would you describe Nude Descending a Staircase Number 2?
I'm looking at it right now, and it's brown and white, and it is. I'll just say these look like etched rectangular figures, and they are actually going from the upper left-hand corner descending to the lower right-hand corner, and these tall kind of, I can't say that they're of some figure. They're definitely figurative. They could all be one person, and it would look like a series, as you say, of photographs of this one person in stop motion. The bottoms of their pants definitely remind me of horses' hooves. And interestingly enough, as I'm looking at this same figure just replicating itself one quarter lower, one quarter lower, and then constantly in motion, it does really look, if anyone has ever taken a photograph that got blurred out because there was too much movement, that kind of, it kind of reminds me of that. What do you call that when you right now, if you're watching me,
it's called motion blur. It's called motion blur.
So it's actually, to me, a pretty good version of motion blur.
Yeah, so he's trying to, he's trying to capture that, and the Futurist movement was movement mostly in Italy, and according to Duchamp,
like Brancusi were one of the more famous futurists. Go on.
According to Duchamp, he had never seen futurist work before this, but the other people at the show, so his brothers, his own brothers, and the rest of the Buteau group didn't like this work. Okay, they thought it was futurist. They thought the title was obscene.
Yeah, and you have to remember it was a bit of a put down because the futurists were aligned with the fascists in Italy, so it was a pretty strong slur. It would be like saying, hey, you must be a MAGA artist because you drew an American flag with a cowboy and a gun.
Right. The futurists were kind of like utopians, right? But they were they were utopians that by any means
loved
necessary.
Science and engineering, They love science, engineering, clean lines, and I love Brancusi. So don't get me wrong. And they've made, look, if you watch a science fiction film from anywhere from the 30s through the 50s, you should thank Futurism because their aesthetic is clearly running the show. It's just because, Cubism, Dadism, these are left of center movements. To be accused of being a futurist is a real smite.
Right. Yeah, and you can see, just by the fact that his painting was a little bit too futurist, even though I don't think Duchamp, by his account, he didn't know what futurism looked like. I would say
the only thing that they share in common is a love of motion.
Right. But, it just goes to show, like, how contentious these art movements had become. I mean, I have read other places about some of these groups of artists actually coming to blows, like in the streets.
Well, certainly in this period of the 20th century, because so much of art movements were also aligned with political movements, they really were. I mean, artists were really now agents of political change, especially groups like the Cubists, the Dadists, and the Futurists. So that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, although
anyway,
I will say though that kind of violence would have been rare though. But I think. Okay, so now you were asking me about the 1913 Armory Show in New York City.
Right. This was where it became a cause celeb.
Yeah. So in 1913, there was a big art show in New York, and I think it was at a place called.
It's the New York Armory. It's on the Upper East Side. I've gone by there a lot. It's right off of Park Avenue. And this is really America. 1913 America is a great time financially. America's rising wealth, great families, especially in New York. And this is the beginning of seeing European art come to America. Here are the great European artists of the day coming to America. And America is, at this period in history, is not very rich in artists. I mean, there's a couple great ones in that period, but not a lot. But there's a great deal of excitement to see what Europe will bring us. The wealthy patrons of Manhattan society.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I mean, even today, but I'm sure even back then, Americans still had like inferiority complex as compared to Europeans. And so when they're looking at this
very wealthy country, but not a lot of taste. That's the way I would describe 1913 haute bourgeois, wealthy, great 400 families America. Very much in awe of Europe, but also very conventional.
Right. So Americans would go to this show and they would be looking at this show to see what their the best minds in the world thought about things, right? The kind of art they made.
And their expectation really was much more of the work of the people you had mentioned from the 19th century. So it'd be like if today you went to a museum. So this is just going to be all NFT art? Oh, I heard about it on the CBS Morning Show. I'm curious to see what all this NFT art will be.
Hey, tell me, Chris, the Armory, how big of a building is it in New York?
Well, here's a brief thing. So, at the end of the 19th century, there was a giant series of labor uprisings in all the major cities in America. So, what they did was they built these armories to house the National Guard. So, if there was any labor riots of any sort, the National Guard could go in and quash them. So the Armory is a very large building on Park Avenue. I believe it's in the 70s. It could be in the 80s. I have to look it up. But it's an entire New York City block, and it was designed to house a battalion of soldiers who could come out and quash a bunch of rioters. So it's a very big space.
Okay, and so for some reason they're having a big art show there, and I think most of the art is fairly conventional from what I've read, but they have one room they call it the Cubist room. And that's where they put all the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so somehow Duchamp gets his work in there, and it's Nude Descending a Staircase is in there. And I think he had 4 works in there actually, including Nude Descending a Staircase. And so Julian Street, an art critic for the New York Times, wrote that the work resembled an explosion in a shingle factory.
Which is actually kind of true. In fairness, he's kind of right.
And cartoonists satirized the piece. You can go on the Wikipedia. You can look at the cartoons people drew. Like there's a work entitled "Food Descending a Staircase." Let's see what else. American Art News offered a prize to anyone who could find the nude. Oh, and and this work became so famous that even Theodore Roosevelt, the president, he
former
had to,
president Theodore Roosevelt in 1913, to be clear.
well, former president, he had to weigh in. He had to say, he said, take the picture for which he wrote this. He said, take the picture for which some reason is called a naked man going downstairs. There is in my bathroom a really good Navajo rug, which, on any proper interpretation of the Cubist theory, is a far more satisfactory and decorative picture. Now, if for some inscrutable reason it suited somebody to call this rug a picture of, say, a well-dressed man going up a ladder, the name would fit the facts just about as well as in the case of the Cubist picture of the naked man going downstairs. From the standpoint... From the standpoint of terminology, each name would have whatever merit inheres in a rather cheap straining after effect, and from the standpoint of decorative value, of sincerity, and of artistic merit, the Navajo rug is infinitely ahead of the picture.
Okay, so I just want to say in defense of the former president, I don't know his number, but and former police commissioner of New York City, at this period in history, we do appreciate Native American art, and things like Navajo rugs I have seen in museums, and it is beautiful craftsmanship, and everything he said in the positive about that rug is not silly. It's actually quite. He was a well-educated Harvard boy.
I don't think.
If you remove the irony of if you remove his sarcasm, he is correct about Navajo rugs. He is completely wrong about Duchamp. But I have to give him his points. He's actually kind of right about Native American art being.
Well, I don't think he's trying to denigrate the Navajo rug. I mean, there's a long tradition in America of people collecting Native American artworks, and it goes way back. I mean, if you study this area, it's very interesting. Getting true Native American works, like from before tribes were despoiled, shall we say, is like a whole thing. You get millions of dollars for that work.
It's weird that he can appreciate the artistry that goes into one thing that's very abstract, and then you show him something else abstract, and he just totally doesn't get it.
I feel like
he would have been the Barack Obama of his day.
I feel like Duchamp's painting, it started a meme where everybody just jumped on it, because it was so ridiculous. I mean, because, Duchamp has this peculiar talent as an artist, and that's naming his works. If he had named it something boring, and, his brothers wanted him to erase the name of, they kicked it out of the show. They said, we don't like the name. They didn't like a lot of things about it, but they especially didn't like the name. He has this particular talent of naming his works in a way that gets attention, and I think his work in the Armory Show became this meme, because of the way it looked, because of the name, and it just took off, and everybody had to weigh in, and, making fun of it became like a national obsession.
I would imagine, since it was such a disaster, no one probably bought the picture.
Well, ironically, he had 4 paintings at the Armory Show, I believe, and he sold them all, including Nude Descending a Staircase. It was bought by a San Francisco lawyer, Frederick C. Torrey. He hung it in his home in Berkeley, guys from Berkeley.
Oh, of course, because I guarantee you right now, Torrey's great-great-granddaughter or great-great-grandson has a very large collection of NFT art in Berkeley.
It is now, I think the painting is now, they hung it in their house over the staircase. There's a picture on Wikipedia of like the picture, Nude Descending a Staircase over their staircase. But it's now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Have you seen it in real life?
You know what? I think I did see it when I was in the Philadelphia Museum, but it wasn't very memorable to me. I mean, it's like a, it's a great representation of Cubist work. I mean, if you compare it to Picasso, I mean, you can see why Picasso is so revered today. If you look at a lot of Picasso's, because Picasso's just a lot more inventive, I think, with his painting. It's there's something to be said about burying the figure, about burying the subject. I don't, that's the fun thing about a Picasso. When you look at a Picasso, you can definitely make out the subject.
Yeah.
And Nude Descending the Staircase, while it's a Nude Descending Staircase takes it as far as possible. Okay, so you can see what Duchamp's trying to do. He's trying to bury the subject as much as he can, and see how far he can push it, right? Yeah. Because like you said earlier, Chris, you can definitely make something out, but it's barely there. It's almost gone.
So then I guess what happens there is after that point, I can see that he didn't have a great employment history after that. But anyway, like, what happened to him for the rest of that decade? In 1913, after the show, he's back in Paris, and he gets a job as a librarian. And, oh my Lord, really?
Yeah, and he's just trying to make the money, trying to make some money. And he has a small studio. He claims to have made his first Readymade at this time, which is a bicycle wheel mounted on a stool. He didn't display it anywhere. He just like played with it. And he didn't have to go to World War I because he had a heart murmur. Now he sells 4 paintings at the Armory Show.
Right.
And I'm not sure how long it took him to get the money, but by 1915 he's like I'm going to take this money and move to New York.
Like most celebrities.
Well, the funny thing is so he sells these paintings at the Armory Show, but he couldn't even get Nude Descending the Staircase into the Puteaux Group show. So, and you see this with Duchamp. He makes these memorable, wonderful works, that capture people's imagination, that sometimes cause controversy. But his fellow artists don't appreciate him. And they want to kick him out of the group all the time. In fact, we're going to get to another example of that.
Are you going to talk about Dada now?
Yeah, so let's talk about Dada.
So what is Dada, and what was Duchamp's involvement in Dada?
Okay, so Dada is one of the more nihilistic, crazier art movements in that there's no actual philosophy. Okay, so World War I has happened, and people, the artists are all sitting around smoking their cigarettes, drinking their coffee, and talking about how like life is meaningless as usual, right? But now it's even more meaningless because of the war. And so Dadism is like just a made up word. There's some speculation that it came from randomly selecting a word in the French dictionary or something. And it's not supposed to mean anything. The Dada movement is just supposed to mean nothing. And a lot of Dada works. And it's an interesting art movement because you think, well, here's an art movement where we don't have any intellectual basis. We don't have any guidelines. We don't have any kind of direction. But so what are we going to make? Well, it's actually a very interesting movement. If you look at Dada works, they're all very interesting, because it's like the artists are freed up to make anything. So I'll just read a list of like some of the mediums that Dada touched. So of course the visual arts, but also literature, poetry, theater, graphic design. It was generally anti-war. Okay, and sometimes it was anti-art, and it was also so you're making art that's anti-art, and also it was sometimes anti-bourgeois. Okay, and it was kind of lefty usually. So Duchamp joined an organization called the Society of Independent Artists in New York, which was a Dadaist movement, and there was a handful of famous artists who were part of it, and so the Society of Independent Artists decided to have a show, but because they're Dadaists, there's not going to be a jury, there's not going to be prizes, because usually the way art shows worked, and I think to a certain extent today they still work the same way, right? So you have like a show, and then you have like a judge or judges who are like famous artists, or they're famous for some reason, and they're supposed to artists are supposed to submit works to these people. The people are supposed to decide which works get into the show. They're just supposed to decide which works are the best, and they're supposed to give prizes to the works. You know, they're supposed to set up criterias of the works, like the work had to have been produced like in the last year. You know, it has to be Dadist, it has to be Cubist, you know, something. And so the Dadists, the Society of Independent Artists, they decide, because the Dadists are like anti-art, you know, they're like just whatever, anything goes, you know, we give up. The Dadists are like, we give up, right? We give up on society, we give up on civilization. We're not going to have any rules. What?
Everything's absurd to the Dadists.
Everything's absurd, right? So we're going to give up on everything. Anybody can get in. All you got to do is pay the $6 membership fee. And then you can have your work in the show, right? And so there's like over 2,000 works in this show. So this is the show's in 1917, and this is the first time Duchamp enters what exhibits what he calls a ready-made.
Yeah.
Now here's a quote from Duchamp of what he was trying to do with ready-mades. It's very short. Everyday objects raised to the dignity of a work of art by the artist's act of choice. So imagine taking like let's say a bookshelf. He didn't have a bookshelf. He had a bottle rack, actually. But imagine taking just an ordinary bookshelf and saying, okay, this is my work of art now. I call it
he signs
bookshelf.
His name.
Yeah, he might sign his name on it. I mean, he didn't sign his name on all of them. So for this show in 1917, he thought it'd be great if he just got an ordinary urinal, and he mounted the urinal on a pedestal. And then, for some reason, he decided to sign it R. Mutt. First initial R, and then
I remember when I was in college in art history class, and none of us could believe that this audacious work. Now, folks, I'm just going to tell you right now, if you go to Google and type in R period M-U-T-T, and you go to images, you're going to go, wait, I don't think this is a painting. It is a urinal. Ladies, it's the thing that guys pee into. Guys, you recognize it immediately. It's just literally the part of the urinal that you pee in. And then on the left-hand side, and what looks like almost magic marker or paint, is just the words R-M-U-T-T, 1917. 1917, yeah, that's it. And you're like, huh? Anyway, that was my reaction.
So where did you first see this?
In art history in college.
And so what did you?
And you go, huh? What? Now, 40 years later, or 30 years later, like, oh, that's just art. You know, and I'm like,
do you remember what your classmates thought of it?
Well, it's weird because my classmates were in the Midwest were even a little more shocked than I was that, like, you could just take an abstract everyday object, put a name on it, not your name, just a name on it, and you could claim this abstract everyday object as your own work of art. I mean, anything and everything. Now, mind you, we were in our early 20s and late teens, so this sense of irreverency actually was quite appealing.
All right, so this is, in 1964, Duchamp said of this work, it sprang from the idea of making an experiment concerned with taste. Choose the object which has the least chance of being liked, a urinal. Very few people think there's anything wonderful about a urinal. He called it fountain, by the way. So anyway, he displays this at the show, or he tries to display it at the show, right? But he goes to the show. I think this is the story. I mean, I've tried to piece together the story. So he goes to the show, and he's like, oh, I'm going to see my urinal. I'm going to see my work at the show, right? There's 2,000 other works of art. People have sent in works of art from all over the world.
Yeah.
Okay? And he's looking around, and it's nowhere. And he finally finds it, like, behind a partition somewhere. Like, they hid it. No one could see it. So he got really angry. He grabbed it, and he left. And he decided, after that, he was never going to be part of an art group again. But it's funny, it's funny that, I mean, there are thousands of works of art at this show, right? And I bet you, Chris, that fountain is probably the only work that anybody remembers from this show.
Well, didn't the fountain about 20 years ago receive a very important award?
Well, in 2004, it was voted the most influential artwork of the 20th century by 500 selected British art world professionals. Second place got Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and third got Andy Warhol's Marilyn Diptych. The Independent said in a 2008 article that with this single work, Duchamp invented conceptual art and severed forever the traditional link between the artist's labor and the merit of the work.
It's interesting. It really reminds me of pop art of the 60s.
Well, you can definitely see how Warhol did the same thing, right? He took like an ordinary everyday object, a Campbell's soup can, and then he painted it. and he didn't really change it that much, and he raised it to the level of significance, of art.
What did Duchamp think of the pop art movement?
Okay, so this is what he wrote about pop art in 1964. Pop art is a return to conceptual painting virtually abandoned except by the surrealists. Since Courbet in favor of retinal painting, if you take a Campbell's soup can and repeat it 50 times, you are not interested in the retinal image. What interests you is the concept that wants to put 50 Campbell's soup cans on a canvas. So, I mean, he liked pop art. I mean, pop art is doing what he was doing. You could almost argue that he was doing pop art.
Well, I mean, isn't the Readymade really the precursor to pop art? I mean, could you expand a little bit more maybe on the Readymade? It's such a significant contribution that he made.
Okay, I'll give you some other examples of Readymade. So Bottle Rack, I already mentioned, which was a bottle drying rack he signed. Let's see. A snow shovel called Prelude to a Broken Arm. Let's see. There was Fountain. There's also like... okay, so he also did... L.H.O.O.Q, which is...
that's a very subversive work. Yes, that's almost like a parody, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I don't know if you could consider it a ready-made, but this is what he did. So, this is the interesting thing about Duchamp. This is why, I love him as an artist, because he's very inventive, He's not just reiterating things over and over and over, the same concepts. He's always trying to be inventive. Well, his output over his lifetime was low. There's only something like 20 or 30 ready-mades throughout his life.
But this subversive work, which is, I guess, more a parody than a ready-made, which you see a lot of even in today's contemporary art. This what L.H.O.O.Q came out in 1919, and I think this is the one that's easiest to describe. So why don't you describe it?
Well, it's just a copy of the Mona Lisa, like a bad copy in black and white. This is 1919 he makes this, and then he draws a mustache and a goatee on her. And then at the bottom he wrote the initials L.H.O.O.Q, which when you read them out loud in French, it sounds like the phrase she has a hot ass.
Oh my God, that's so funny. He really could have just been writing NFT artwork today with that.
You could also, Duchamp also liked that you could phonetically say L-H-O-O-Q as look, and it sounded like the English word look. He liked it when there was like ambiguity and wordplay like that. Maybe I should say, I don't know if I should say this, but I don't know if it has much to do with what I'm going for here, but some people speculate that Duchamp combined his own face with that of the Mona Lisa in L.H.O.O.Q.
I think so, because it's a kind of a masculine-looking version of Mona Lisa.
And the thing is Duchamp may have been a cross-dresser. He may have, he used to hang out with Man Ray, and there's some pictures of him dressed up as a woman. And he even had a name, I can't remember what it was now, but he even had a name for himself when he was dressed as a woman, which shows that you're very serious about cross-dressing when you have like a
he had a
name
persona,
and identity.
I guess.
Right, and he even used one of the photographs of himself as a woman on one of his ready-mades. It was a bottle of perfume, and he replaced the photograph of the other woman on the bottle of perfume, stuck his on there.
Well, who's that woman again who does men and women in her Sherman? Cindy Sherman does that in her photography, where she will dress as a man and take on a male persona and do a self-portrait of herself in a male persona. That's actually interesting. He really is part of that long line of artists who can just change his gender and his persona for the sake of the image that he's working on. Really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his personal life was like. I mean, he supposedly went out and partied with some of the other artists, especially when he was young. He was married. There's not a lot of gossip about him, so I think he mostly lived a fairly quiet life, which we'll get to, actually, because his next work, should we go to his next work?
You know, I was going to ask you about this. It's a great title, Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors. Now, I did look at it, and I cannot describe it, so you're going to have to describe this one. It comes out in 1923, and it's about all I can. I really have no words to describe it, so please describe it.
Well, I just want to say, this is an interesting work, especially because of the medium he's using, but if you look at works from that era, there's a lot of invention, and I don't want to take anything away from Duchamp, but this was an unusual work. But everyone of this time is trying to make, there's a lot of experimentation. So he takes two panes of glass, and he just puts them on top of each other, so it looks like a window.
Yes.
And on the top pane, you have a weird abstract figure. On the bottom pane, you have a bunch of weird abstract figures, like messing with some sort of contraption, it looks like. I mean, it's very abstract. And there's no paint involved. It's like, I think it's foil and wire.
Oh, wow.
And literal dust. Like,
wow.
Supposedly he sandwiched the foil and wire between panes of glass. And before he did that, he let dust gather on a lot of it in his apartment because he was using the dust as part of his media. And then a funny part about it is the work, it was being transported somewhere and it fell and broke. Mm-hmm. And he decided not to fix it. He just said, "Nope, now that's part of the work. I like it better that way." I think he was just super lazy, but.
No, that is fascinating. He also did work with explain his relationship to the mobile.
Well, he probably invented mobiles, and a lot of people know mobiles because
Calder,
like made tons of mobiles. He was obsessed with making mobiles. But Duchamp, he started out in his studio by just trying to make physical works, kinetic artworks, I think he used to call them, they would move on their own, and he probably invented mobiles. So, I mean, he wasn't very famous for it, though. I don't think there's a lot of, he didn't really experiment with them that much.
Did he, I heard he also worked on a musical project?
Yeah, so he worked on a musical project that was never published or exhibited during his lifetime. It was called Erratum Musical. I don't exactly understand it. There's like a funnel, and there's cars, and there's balls, and it's supposed to be some sort of it's supposed to be some sort of random noise generator. So you set it up. It's almost like a kinetic piece. So you set it up, and then it just randomly makes music. The music is random, so it's not like a music box. And John Cage, who's famous, for a lot of experimental music, he made something similar called Music of Changes in 1951, which comes after what Duchamp supposedly made. In 1968, Duchamp and Cage appeared together at a concert entitled Reunion, where they played a game of chess, and they composed music by triggering a series of photoelectric cells underneath the chessboard. So it was a similar concept. The sounds were randomly generated by their chess game.
That's so cool that these two men would meet. I think of John Cage so much and more in the later part of the 20th century, but chess is the great unifier, and we know, right, that chess is a very important part of his life too, right? Tell me about that.
Right, so he worked on this work, Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors. He supposedly worked on this for 10 years, this work. Yeah. And it's funny to look at it because, I think I've seen it in person, if I remember right. And, the photos online don't do it that much justice. It's much more detailed when you see it in person. It's almost a work you have to see in person. It's very aesthetic, I think that Duchamp is really, Bride sur Berre, he's really, he's in a transitional place because, a lot of his early work is very conceptual. Like the Readymades are like low effort, but extremely conceptual, right? But Bride sur Berre, you're getting to a work, it takes him 10 years to make. I mean, this is a work that is much more aesthetic. The way it looks is much more important to him. And when we get to his final work, okay.
So I just want to interrupt for a second. So soon after he completes Bride sur Berre in 1921, he's out of the game by 1923. What happened?
Right. So in 1923, he tells everybody he's giving up art and he's going to devote his life to playing chess. And he wanted to be a chess master. And what's funny is like, you have to. If you're going to be a top chess player, you pretty much have to devote your life to playing chess. I mean, that's what top chess players do, He can't be a top fine artist and a top chess player. It's not going to happen, right? And I looked it up. His chess rating was probably around 2,200 to 2,400. And if you know anything about chess, he was a pretty good player, he went to the chess master level.
Wow.
But he would have had to have gotten up, I think, to around 2,600 to be like a top world player, which at some point in his life he gave up, okay, being a top player.
He was closing in on it. He was closing in on it, though. He came close.
Yes, but it's see, I love playing chess too, and like I don't know, I'm not even nearly as good as Duchamp. I don't know how I'd ever be that good. You really have to study this game to get that good. I mean,
so how did he make a comeback?
Well, I don't know if you call it a comeback, but everybody thought. Let me tell you. Let me read this quote I found about him talking about chess. Okay. Just because I think it's interesting, he became a chess journalist when he realized he was never going to be a top player.
Oh wow!
He said, "I am still a victim of chess. It has all the beauty of art and much more. It cannot be commercialized. Chess is much purer than art in its social position." On another occasion, Duchamp elaborated, "The chess pieces are the block alphabet which shapes thoughts, and these thoughts, although making a visual design on the chessboard, express their beauty abstractly like a poem. I have come to the personal conclusion that while all artists are not chess players, all chess players are artists." And I love playing chess too, but I don't know. He really loved playing chess. That whole culture of chess playing, Chris, is kind of like gone now. But there were chess publications and tournaments were in the newspapers, and there were crowds, and top chess players were famous, and I don't know. That whole culture is kind of gone now, I feel like.
Well, let me just reframe my question, because I didn't mean to say what... I just know that the thing about Duchamp that's kind of fascinating is that he really, as an artist, stops his career in like 21. He's still an active member of the art world, but really, I would say if you look at the American abstractionist movement of the late 40s and 1950s, they're clearly revering Duchamp.
Well, I don't know how famous, I'm not exactly sure how famous he was before the 50s, but I guess artists like Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns.
You can really see it in Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns how much of an influence their work comes from his work.
Yeah, maybe even the pop artists like Warhol.
Absolutely. So it is a weird thing that he unlike a lot of the great artists who then after their time is over, they're in refute. He's more like Whitman, you know what I'm saying? And that Whitman was rediscovered again in the 50s and 60s and really...
Well, he's still alive. He's still alive, and he's still, from what I could tell, he's still involved in a lot of art societies. Maybe not a member, but he's talking to people.
Right.
He's contributing to journals.
People like Rauschenberg and John will use Readymade, will be absurdists, will have that same. And the abstractionist movement, really, you can really see how Nude Descending a Staircase absolutely influenced the abstractionist movement. So let's just talk about some key works that we haven't talked about yet. Like, I want to talk about the work called his Twine.
Okay, so yeah, he makes some installations. So this was in Paris. Let's see. The Surrealists. This is from Wikipedia. The Surrealists wanted to create an exhibition which in itself would be a creative act, thus working collaboratively in its staging. Duchamp was named as the generateur arbitre. Dali and Max Ernst were technical directors. Man Ray was the chief lighting technician. It's so hilarious reading these names. These are all some of the most famous artists of all time, you know. The most beautiful streets of Paris filled one side of the lobby with mannequins dressed by various surrealists. The main hall, the room of superstition, was a cave. Wait a second. Oh, I think I skipped this somehow, but yeah. So the Twine, he had this room filled with twine, and so supposedly there's like it's a show, it's a gallery, and there's artworks on the wall, but there's all this twine just like going all over the room, and you know, all tied up like a spider web all over the room. And some of it's balled up, and supposedly there's things inside the balls. You don't know what they are. But when you try to go in the room and look at the artwork, you can't see it because there's too much twine everywhere. So, I mean, it's very Dada-esque. He made another one called 1,200 coal bags suspended from the ceiling over a stove, which was literally just coal bags suspended from the ceiling. Floor was covered by dead leaves and mud from the cemetery. There's an artificial water-filled pond with real water lilies and reeds in the middle. Single light bulb was the only illumination. The patrons were given flashlights to see the art on the walls. The aroma of roasting coffee filled the air. At midnight, a scantily dressed girl suddenly arose from the reeds, jumped on a bed, shrieked hysterically, and then disappeared just as quickly. It says in Wikipedia, much to surrealist satisfaction, the exhibition scandalized many of the guests. It's funny, like, how often you read, like, whenever Duchamp is involved with his show, like, how much controversy his works seem to generate.
You know, one of the pieces that I really like that I don't even really feel is very controversial, it's just, I think, a beautiful work of art. It's called number 1, The Waterfall, number 2, The Illuminating Gas. And it is a naked woman, or it looks like a naked woman, in maybe a field or a cave, it's hard to tell, holding up a light or a candle in one arm covered in twigs. You really can't see her face. And then you can look out of the cave or out of the covered area and you can see just tall trees and a blue sky. And it's very fascinating, very mysterious, and I would argue a very traditional work of figurative art, a very traditional work even of naturalist art. It is, in my opinion, so different and so mature in vision compared to the other stuff. It has mystery, but it doesn't have cheeky irreverence. Can you tell us a little more about that?
All right, well, okay, so Duchamp died in 1966 or 67.
Okay.
And everybody thought that was it. There's no more art, you know, because like he had given up making art like I don't know, what is it, like 40 years earlier.
Yes.
But suddenly, I think it was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, they got some packages, and it was like Duchamp's last work.
Well, he had worked on it for 20 years, right?
Yeah, in secret. Nobody knew he was working on it. I mean, this is the crazy thing. Everybody thought he was just playing chess, but he was working on this thing. So it shows up at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, I believe, and it's where it still is today. And there was a long set of instructions about how to assemble it. And he had already,
after his death in 1968.
After his death, yes. And he had kept it a secret until after he died, Chris. I mean, I think the museum knew he was going to send it, but they didn't know exactly how extensive this was going to be. I'm sure they thought he was sending a painting or something like that. So anyway, so they get this work, and it's an installation, like you said. Now, have you seen it, Chris?
Actually, no. I've seen it in art books, but I have not been to the Philadelphia Museum of Art yet. I've been to the Barnes Museum collection, but not the Philadelphia Museum.
All right, let me talk about it. I've seen it. It's amazing. Okay, so this is like his greatest, most profound work, I feel, and nobody ever talks about it, and I think it's because, it's conceptual, but it's also aesthetic. So you have to see it. Okay, I remember, I love Duchamp. I was familiar with Duchamp's work. I had never heard of this work before, Chris. And this is like, I don't know, 10 years ago. I'm in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, just wandering around. And I look, and it looks like a typical museum, white walls, lots of light. And I look over in this hallway, and it's just dark. There's this dark hallway, right? It looks like an alley, right? It's like somebody forgot to turn on the lights over there. It must be maybe that's the basement. Maybe that's the bathroom over there. So I just creep over there, see if there's anything in there. And I look around the corner, and there's this giant ornate double wooden door. Okay, it's huge, Chris, and it looks like it's from the Middle Ages. It's got metal. It's an actual. How do I describe this, Chris? It's an actual like door, like from a medieval castle, just sitting there around the corner in the museum, right? And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I don't even know what it is, Chris. So I go over there, and I'm like, should I even be going over there? Because it's dark, right? Yeah. So I go over there, and when I get closer to the door, I see that you can look. There's light coming through. I think it's the keyhole. Although I've seen in descriptions it says that it's there are 2 eye holes, but I don't remember that. I remember thinking that you could see light coming out of the giant keyhole in the door, and I'm thinking, wow, is this for real? I didn't even know it was an artwork, Chris. I'm thinking, are they setting something up? I mean, what is this? So do I take a chance and peek through the hole and see somebody's office on the other side? So I do it, okay? I do it, Chris. And I peek through, and it's just as you described. You see this, it looks like an actual outdoor scene. I mean, it looks real, Chris, okay? It doesn't look like a work of art. It looks like an actual, it's a diorama, but it looks like, it looks like the real world through this peephole. You see, a field. You see a woman's naked body. She's laying there on the grass. She's holding something. You see a river. The river has, I don't know how he did it, but Duchamp made it so it looks like the river is flowing. It's some sort of trick of light. I mean, there's things moving. It has to be plugged in. There's electricity. I mean, it looks like you're looking outdoors.
Yeah.
And the way Duchamp did it, so that you have to bend over and look through the peephole. It cuts off your field of view, so that it enhances the illusion, so that it makes it more realistic, right? Because you can't.
I see that. I can definitely see that. Yeah, looking at it, I could imagine just that. That's what I saw just looking at it. Yeah.
Right, and you can't see the woman's head. Okay.
Yeah, which is very troublesome.
Right. So you don't know. So there's ambiguity to the piece. You don't know. I mean, you could stare at it. I stared at it for a long. You can stare at it for a long time, and you can't figure out: is she just laying there sleeping? Is she dead? Did something horrible happen to her? And you don't know. And it's completely ambiguous. And and I think, what's really extraordinary about this piece. Well, there's so many extraordinary things about this piece, Chris, but this is the guy that blew apart the whole notion of art with Fountain, right? So he displayed this thing called Fountain, and he said, art can be any crap that the artist wants to say is art, right? I mean, it could be just something stupid,
right?
And most artists today say, oh yeah, Fountain, that's the greatest piece of work ever. It's just a horrible, piece of crap that, nobody cares about, but now it's art, because Duchamp, because an artist said it was, It's a beautiful, incredible conceptual idea, that underpinned the whole art world for 100 years. And then you creep into the Philadelphia Art Museum and you go into a dark corner, and Duchamp has created a work that says, I'm going to give you back art. I'm going to give you back aesthetics. This is what art can do. It can create an experience for you that seems real, that feels real. I mean, it's almost like he has gone the other side of art. He's gone on he's gone the full spectrum, Chris.
It's a full journey, and that it should take him. He went from art that he could make quickly to art that took the last 20 years of his life, and that he would do in secret. That was so ahead of its time again. Randall, this has just been so fascinating. What do you have any final thoughts or words you want to share on the totality of this man's work, his contributions, his legacy, what people maybe not get right about him?
Well, I'll just say that I think Given is like his greatest work, and if you're ever in Philadelphia, you should go see it. And I really think that people don't understand it. People don't talk about it enough. Because people don't go to see it. You have to really see this work. It's just I feel like seeing it is a profound experience, and I mean, Fountain works without seeing it. Like you're.
Strangely enough, I've seen Fountain, so it's pretty mind blowing to see it. Oh, it is what it exactly is, and it's nothing more than what it is, and it's deflating and challenging at the same time. And I think, just to wrap things up, please, I would like you to give the last words, but I'm just going to say my opinion. The thing that I really like about Duchamp is that he challenges our notions of not just reality, but our tastes. And he challenges, he really does get us to question all these assumptions that we have made about art for the last couple of centuries, ever since the Renaissance. And I think that when you look at contemporary artwork today, his intellectual and aesthetic legacy is very much at play, probably much more so than the other people that he was offending at the time or going up again.
Well, it's almost comical just how much criticism he got. I mean, today it just seems so silly.
Yeah. And it seems like, well, but again, no one is a legend in their own lifetime. Well, Randall, I really want to thank you for bringing up this long overdue discussion on this artist who I still think to this day is still somebody people tend to discount more than they should. So you really gave us a great deal of insight. Any last words before we go?
No, just try to make it the Philadelphia Museum of Art if you check it out.
Folks, visual art is great. Almost every place in America or any place in the world has a museum of fine art. Go see, support your local art museum, support artists. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.